What's up, PGF Nation? College football is back, and so are we. We're breaking down some of the biggest games from the weekend, who looked good, who's already in trouble. I'm Brad Fowler. With me, as always, my co-host, Alex Higdon. Alex, let's kick this off. Let's start with the most recent game, the game that everybody was watching the other night, North Carolina, TCU. Bill Belichick makes his college football coaching debut. TCU absolutely destroyed North Carolina in this game. Kind of a shocking outcome. Vegas had this line pretty close. I thought this would be a competitive game. I think a lot of people did, but this really got out of control in a hurry.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that Belichick had everybody practicing tackling all summer long. Apparently not, because what I saw, I think I watched for probably about 2 to 3 quarters where Hoover didn't even throw the ball forward. He was just making screen passes or lateral passes, and then receivers were breaking tackles and just running through the defense. I didn't see a running back tackled all game long. The only time I saw them close to tackling was when they pushed one out of bounds. Kavarian Barnes looking like a little bowling ball out there, like a Maurice Jones-Drew just taking off and running. Then I looked up again, and then it was a completely different. I was like, who's that guy running? Then I looked up again. It was another guy that had a big run. It was just big run after big run after big run. Great catch by Jordan Dwyer on that touchdown pass early in the game to kind of set things off, and then everything went off the rails. Then it was just bad defense, bad offense. Everything was just bad all around.
That opening drive, that scripted drive for North Carolina, they come out, they march down the field, they look really sharp, and I think all of us were kind of going, whoa, okay. But then the wheels came off. It was amazing because they really couldn't follow it up with anything. It was almost like TCU kind of took that first punch, and then they countered, and they figured out quickly, it seemed like, what UNC wanted to do, and they had all the right moves. To your point, Alex, the defense looked, and I think that was probably the most alarming thing for me, is because we know Belichick's specialty is defense. We know he's all about the details in the special teams, like you mentioned, the tackling, and I didn't see any of that from this team. I mean, they really looked lost out there. I'm wondering if they need to simplify the scheme. I'm wondering if he came out maybe with a little too much complexity for his defense for a young team like this, with all these transfers, all these young guys. Obviously, it's not the NFL. You don't have as much time to practice with these guys as well. So maybe that's something going forward. We'll see. Maybe he'll kind of dial it back a little bit. But you're right. TCU, man, moving the ball on these guys, 29 first downs, almost 8 yards of play, just sloppy football, something you just don't typically see from a Bill Belichick team. I think the only possible good thing that came from this, so to speak, was Max Johnson coming in later in the game. Gio Lopez gets injured. It looks like some kind of back injury, and he looked pretty good. Now, the game was already out of hand at that point, but he looked pretty sharp, threw a touchdown pass. He was accurate. He was on time. And I'm seeing reports now that Bill Belichick has said he's left the door open for the possibility of a quarterback controversy here. So I wouldn't be totally shocked if it's an open competition again come next week. Let me ask you this, Alex, before we move on to the next game, because we got a lot of games to talk about. Panic meter for North Carolina after week one. Where's the panic meter for you? 1 out of 10 for the Tar Heels.
Well, I'm gonna say this: the panic meter is low for me. However, being in this state, probably about 40 minutes from where Chapel Hill is, they're at a 7, and it's not because they lost; it's how they lost, and they were expecting at minimum the defense to look like they were prepared and they were ready to take on, and they did not look like they wanted to play or tackle.
You kind of have your hand on the pulse of what the fans in that area are feeling. So a 7 is definitely alarming. I think for me, it probably feels more like a 4 or a 5 because it was ugly. They didn't look very competitive. If this would have been a close game and they lost, I don't think anybody would have been too upset, but just the way they lost that game, just how undisciplined they look, how sloppy it was.
Brad, 41 unanswered points. 41.
It was pretty shocking, to say the least. All right, let's jump into the big heavyweight matchup. Of course, Texas, Ohio State. This was a huge early week one game. By the way, how good was week one? Was this the best college football week one of all time? I mean, I'm not kidding.
It's up there. It's up there.
It was unbelievable, Alex. There were so many games. Normally we get maybe 1 or 2 of these big ranked matchups on week one. But this Texas Ohio State game, obviously a ton of hype. Arch Manning comes in. Now, we saw him start a few games last year, but this is his first season as the starter, as the guy. We've all kind of been waiting to see him take over under center for Texas, and it didn't look very good. And now 0 for 5 on throws over 5 yards downfield in the first 3 quarters. He had that telegraphed interception, almost threw another one. It just looked like he was having trouble getting into the flow of the game, slow going through his progressions. I don't know what he was trying to do with some of the arm angles. I don't remember ever seeing him trying to go sidearm. It was kind of interesting, but he looked really uncomfortable. And I got to give credit to Ohio State because this team absolutely looks like the real deal. The defense under Matt Patricia, they were swarming. They had a lot of different looks. They were really causing him to think, and I think it really disrupted his timing and confidence back there. They absolutely look like a national title contender, Ohio State, that is. I think a lot of people thought they might take a step back, but man, I don't know. This team looks absolutely legit, Alex. What were your big takeaways from this game?
Well, I think the first big takeaway for me was actually, you pointed it out, Matt Patricia, the irony of Matt Patricia, disciple of Bill Belichick, having his defense ready to play, and then, on the other side, Belichick not. That was the first thing. I'm going to say this, and I said it all last year. I believe Texas as a whole, and this is not even about them winning and losing the game. This is about the development of Arch Manning. I said last year they weren't going to win a chip unless they started Arch Manning. I think they are a year late on the development of where he should be, and the expectation of what everybody is now are the things that he should have already been going through, and coming into the end of that season, start hitting a stride, and then coming into this season firmly with everything in hand and in shape, knowing how to lead this team now that they lost a lot of big time players on defense and on offense, even though Texas defense did show up to play. I don't want to discredit them. They did show up to play. I believe Jeremiah Smith only had 6 catches for 43 yards, even though Ohio State's going through with a new quarterback. But the whole point is, I think that now you're going to see the growing pains. He's going through the growing pains that he should have been going through last year. Now you're seeing it now in his junior year, when everybody's talking about, oh, he's going to go pro already. And I think that's what it is. So when you talk about, you asked about the expectation for North Carolina a moment ago, where is the expectation? Not necessarily for Texas, because I think Arch, by game 3, 4, and 5, he's going to start to look like the guy that people think he's supposed to. But coming out of this game, I would wonder what is the meter on just Arch Manning and what they think.
Yeah, I'm not going to sell my Arch Manning stock. I'm not going to overreact to it. That was a big pressure spot, playing against a really, really good team on the road, hostile environment. Yeah, he didn't look very good, and I think a lot of us expect him to play better. But like I said, I'm not selling my Texas stock. I'm not selling the Arch Manning stock, because I'm with you. I think we're going to see him play a lot better football by the time this year is over. And I think Texas, to your point, that defense already looks like championship level. So I think if the offense can just get up to speed, they're going to be a really, really tough team to beat. And I don't think Arch Manning in the offense is going to have to be great for them to win a lot of football games, because that defense is absolutely legit. So, yeah, where's the panic meter for Texas? Where would you put it?
I would actually put it overall at probably a 3. The next 3 weeks, they get San Jose State, UTEP, and Sam Houston, all at home, all games that he can start to rev up, because then they face Florida. We'll talk about that when we get there, but they can rev up, and Arch Manning can start the engines going and have it a well-oiled machine by the time they face Florida. And that should also perhaps help them, because the AP poll came out today. I believe they were number 7. So they dropped from number 1 to number 7. Obviously, Ohio State moved up to number 1. So they're gonna have a little bit of ground to make up. Not doesn't push them out of the field of 12, but they're gonna have some ground to make up, depending upon how they want to look at the seeding.
I still think Texas is a legit national title contender. But I do think, even though they were number 3 coming into the year, we all might have been sleeping a little bit on Ohio State. And I'm pointing the finger at myself here, too, because they had to replace their offensive and defensive coordinator. Obviously, new quarterback, a lot of guys to the NFL. But we know that's a program that doesn't rebuild, they reload. So this program looks like they're in good shape to make a run at it again. But I think both these teams look like playoff teams and still look like contenders even after that loss for Texas. Now, a team that I think a lot of people thought could be a contender, and a team that I'm not going to lie, Alex, I might be starting to sell some shares of this stock, and that's Alabama. Wow. What happened over the weekend? Now, look, Florida State, we know that this is a blue blood program, but this is a team coming off a 2-win season. They were a 14.5-point underdog going into this game, and they got pushed around by Florida State. This was a big loss, and I'm telling you, Alabama fans are already starting to ask, can we get the money together to buy out Kalen DeBoer's contract? It is getting ugly in a hurry down in Tuscaloosa. Your overall thoughts on this game before we jump into it?
Well, we know that their panic meter is at 20 right now across the board, so we don't even need to figure that. I think this was a trenches. The Florida State dominated the trenches. That's something that's not typical for Alabama. Now, if I'm not mistaken, they hadn't lost an opening game in 23 years. It was either 22 or 23 years that they had not lost an opening day game, regardless of whether it was a cupcake they faced or a formidable team that they faced as they did. I just believe that this team, they did not look ready to go. And again, after the years we've seen of Saban, we know that there's one thing about this: the Alabama Crimson Tide, win, lose, or draw, they play tough and they run the ball. We didn't see any of that Saturday.
The key word there is tough, because that's something that really stood out to me. Where was the effort? And there's a lot of beat reporters and a lot of people I saw in the media that were questioning Kalen DeBoer after this game about that exact question. It wasn't so much that they lost. It was, where was the effort? Because we saw guys that really looked like they weren't giving their all out there, and that was really probably the most alarming part of this upset. Florida State, look, I'm going to give them a little bit of credit here, though. They look sharp, and that front seven was physical and tough. And like I said a minute ago, they pushed around Alabama, and this is the Alabama team. The only team with a better blue chip ratio, I should say, is Ohio State in the entire country. So this is a program right now. I know Nick Saban is gone, but as far as talent, there hasn't been a big drop off. They are loaded, and there's no reason to think that they should be getting pushed around by anybody. This is now 4 losses for Kalen DeBoer to unranked teams in his first 14 games at Alabama. Just to put that in perspective, Nick Saban lost 4 games to unranked teams in 17 years. So it's crazy the drop-off we've seen from this program all of a sudden. And when you look at their schedule, it doesn't get any easier. So this path for them, now look, because the schedule's tough, they're going to have some opportunities to climb back into the mix if they win a lot of these games. But if they don't start playing better in a hurry, this season could really go off the rails quick. So panic meter, you're right, Alex. I think they are slamming the panic meter right now for Alabama. I think right now it's got to be, realistically, I know you said 20, but it's got to be a 9 or a 10. It's a absolute mess right now. I think this team has clearly taken a step back, and I don't think that they're a playoff team until proven otherwise.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think the reason that it's a lot of Alabama fans say, no, we're not. No, the reason it's at a 10 is because, one, you're losing to unranked teams and your team doesn't look ready to play. 2, realistically, you don't have the money for the buyout. That's the part that we need to start to talk about. You're going to panic because in this NIL race, you can't fall too far behind and not having the money to buy him out. I'm sorry. So that panic meter is at that 9 or 10 because of those 2 things. Never mind the losing. It's about what comes down the luck, what comes with that losing recruits, and then you can't buy out that guy. Listen, and we can end this here. Nobody ever wants to be the guy that follow the legend. You want to be the guy after the guy that follows the legend.
Yeah, and so before we move on, then is it safe to say that the expectations are just too high?
Yes.
Is that because look, I think Kalen DeBoer is a good coach. I really think he is, but you're right. He's following not just a legend, like the legend.
Right.
And I think Alabama fans have really become, let's face it, just spoiled to the point where they think national titles are their birthright. And it just doesn't work that way when a guy like this leaves. Go ask the New England Patriots. It just doesn't happen overnight when you move on to a new regime. Even if you do get a good coach and you have good players, it doesn't just automatically mean you're going to play at that level. And I think this is a harsh reality for them and that fan base right now, because I do think they're a good team, but I think they've got some serious building to do to get back into that playoff mix. Because I think if they keep playing like this, they're going to drop a few games in the SEC, and then there's a good chance they're on the outside looking in.
Yeah, they're gonna listen real quick. They're not making the playoffs because they're gonna have four losses or more. They won. They have Georgia in 3 weeks. They have Georgia. Then they have Tennessee, South Carolina. They have Tennessee, South Carolina, LSU, Oklahoma, back to back to back to back. And then yeah, you have the Iron Bowl, and we're not going to talk about that game. We saw what Auburn looked like against a team that we thought was going to be tough in Baylor. So this team is going to have 5 losses.
Yeah, no, it's a very, very realistic possibility. Absolutely. Now let's stick with one of the teams you just mentioned in the SEC, LSU, Clemson. This was a massive game as well. And this is a massive win for LSU because this is a team that's really struggled in week one under Brian Kelly. And I think there's a lot of pressure on Brian Kelly in this program this year because this is a guy who's been having a lot of success, but hasn't been able to break through like a lot of LSU fans thought that he would. 10 wins, 9 wins, but no SEC titles, no playoff appearances. And this is a fan base, not quite maybe at the Alabama level, but it's definitely a fan base that expects to be competing for titles on a regular basis. And when you bring in a guy like Brian Kelly, when you make that kind of move and you swing for the fence like that, you expect results. Now that he's going into, I believe it's year 4, I think this is kind of the year they've been circling is like, okay, this is the big breakthrough year. And this win might just signify that they're moving in that direction because for the first time in the Brian Kelly era in LSU, the defense looked legit.
Yeah, absolutely. Imagine just based upon this defense looks like right now. What if he had that with the Jay Daniels team? This team would probably be looking like unstoppable. But, ladies and gentlemen, Hal Perkins seems to be back. This is a guy that's been missing for 2 years. Obviously, the injury and then coming off of the injury, he had not been. His name was just not mentioned. This defense looked lost. But, ladies and gentlemen, Hal Perkins looks like he's gonna make his surge to be a top pick in this upcoming draft. I thought the offense just looked like the offense. I know Clemson's defense did stand up, they did show up. However, I thought this was really about the defensive standing, and we know the Brian Kelly will get that offense rolling in some way, shape, or form. Obviously, Nussmeier being looked at as a top pick coming out. So we know that he's gonna have to make his name his presence felt. But I mean, this game was 17-10. But when you look at it, I don't think it was as close as the game really was. We had that bad penalty on that callback. That was ridiculous. I don't even understand. Cade Klubnik, the guy that was coming in, talked about as a top, QB in the future for the NFL draft. He looked terrible. I don't know what was happening on that side of the ball. They kind of looked lost. I know LSU's defense did look like they stepped up and they took, but 31 yards on the ground, I wasn't expecting that at all. Clemson usually always has a couple of good wide receivers. Now they haven't been what LSU and Ohio State have been, but they've been able to churn out some guys. So I'm not sure where the disconnect is there offensively, but defensively, the defense looks like they're ready to play and compete for this, going into this year. I don't know what's happening on that offensive side.
Yeah, some of the big question marks I had for this game was the newly revamped offensive line for LSU. They lost 4 guys to the NFL. We knew that that was going to be a big question mark for them going up against this Clemson defensive front, which has a bunch of NFL dudes on it. I actually thought this was a spot where maybe LSU could be in trouble because I thought Clemson would be able to really pin their ears back and get after Nussmeier, but the offensive line held up pretty well. Now, to your point about LSU's defense, and like we've mentioned, Blake Baker and what he's done with that defense has been pretty impressive. They were the fastest, most physical unit on the field. I don't think it's even close. They were flying around making plays. And to your point, he's really got Harold Perkins playing again back in that star position. I think he was playing out of position in the past, and I think he was also dealing with injuries. Those two things really kind of dropped him off the national radar, but you're right. Now he's kind of back in the role he needs to be in, looking healthy, flying around the field. I thought some of the transfer additions that LSU made had a big impact in this game. Look, I still think Clemson's a pretty good football team. I think this is a team that could bounce back and still make a run at the ACC. Well, they should, quite frankly, make a run in the ACC and be a team that's in the playoff mix. But You're absolutely right. Cade Klubnik was really under pressure. He looked confused. He looked lost. The offense really didn't look like they had any continuity at all going against this LSU defense. And I think if you're LSU, that's got to be the most impressive thing, because you kind of expect a Brian Kelly offense to play better and better as the year goes on. And they're not going to face defenses as good as Clemson's week in and week out. So if they can kind of play a complete game, so to speak, where the offense and defense are both clicking, this team's absolutely dangerous. I think they're a playoff threat. I think they're an SEC contender. This is a team to watch out for going forward. What's the panic meter for Clemson?
Well, I think their panic meter should probably be low because they're playing the ACC. Now, what I do want to see, and some people may laugh, in 2 weeks they play Georgia Tech. We know one thing's for certain, two things for sure. Georgia Tech is going to run the ball. Now, I know they have a good front four in terms of that Clemson defense, but they're going to get a huge test, and they're playing in Atlanta. So that's going to be a huge game that I'm going to be looking at, because Georgia Tech, regardless of what people may think about what they are, a basketball school or a school full of brainiacs, but you're gonna face some guys that they're gonna keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. And I want to see if this team, Clemson, is strong enough to stand up to that in a hostile territory.
Yeah, no, look, I'm with you. And here's the thing. I actually think the ACC might be better than we thought. And when I say we, I mean the media going into the season. I think a lot of people are kind of down on the ACC. So far, we've seen week 0 and obviously now week 1. I think that ACC looks a lot deeper than what I expected. I think there's a few teams that are going to be better than we thought in this conference. And we saw some teams that could be in the mix here. So I don't think it's going to be as easy of a path as a lot of people thought. I mean, at the start of the year, a lot of people were just kind of penciling Clemson in, like, all right, they're just going to run this thing. But look, we're going to talk about them here in a second. Miami, they look like a team that's going to be tough. You mentioned Georgia Tech is a sleeper. Virginia Tech, who we'll talk about in a minute, they lost, but I thought they looked competitive. We've seen some teams here now in this conference that actually look pretty good. I think the depth might be better than people realize right now. So I don't think it's going to be a cakewalk by any means for Clemson. I think for me, the panic meter is probably a 4 or a 5, because I think losing at home is big, and I think having a quarterback as highly regarded as this guy is, I know, and I'm not taking anything away from LSU, but we expected more. I think we all kind of expect him to play better than that. Being a guy with as much experience as he has, as much talent as he has, I think that's a little bit alarming. Can they really compete with the top level teams that puts you in the national title conversation? That might have been a reality check for them, that maybe Clemson's good, but maybe they aren't a national title contenders. But I mentioned Miami, Catholics versus convicts, the old school rivalry for you guys old enough to remember Notre Dame, Miami. Man, these guys had some epic battles back in the day. If you don't know, go check out the 30 for 30 kids. Look, this was a big time win for Miami, because I liked this Notre Dame team in this matchup, but Miami was physical up front. They were tough on both lines of scrimmage against a Notre Dame team that really hangs its hat on the trenches, and Miami pushed them around for the most part.
Yeah, and okay. So let's get a few things. Well, one thing out the way. Mario, you were right that Miami was going to be, because that's his team. He had been talking about it. I, like you, Brad, I think that Notre Dame defense is just going to be too tough for them. But here's the thing about Notre Dame. After watching the game, and again, it's just one game, I felt that they could have gone into the portal and gotten a better quarterback. And it's not a shot at CJ Carr. I just think they had the opportunity to go into the portal and get a better quarterback while the team is still good. Like I thought they had last year and this year, and then I think they're going to go through. We're going to watch all the NFL sons, because in any minute that team is just going to be full of fathers of Notre Dame players. But I thought they had a 2-year run last year and this year that they just missed the window on. They could have taken another leap with a quarterback here. But I cannot take anything away, especially CJ Daniels. Great, nice one-handed catch up the seam for that touchdown, where most people saw Michael Irvin going crazy. But yeah, Miami's defense, which I didn't think they had, showed up again, similar to the Alabama Florida State game, just physical. Because Notre Dame is very always physical, but they matched their physicality, and then they were able to impose their athleticism on top of the physicality onto Notre Dame. Not that they were blown out, but they were able to show some things that I don't think that Notre Dame was ready for, and they're just not explosive enough. I don't think Notre Dame's explosive enough for when they want to get in these type of games when you need a play, one of those 40-yard bombs or, anything like that. I don't think they have enough explosive players right now that they're going to be able to do with some of the teams they might have to face.
Well, look, I'm going to push back a little bit on that because I like CJ Carr and I really like what I saw. And I think he showed some serious flashes against the Miami team that, like we just said, looks really, really good. Now, this is also one of those games that in the last few years, this is the kind of game that usually Miami would drop. This is a game where Mario Cristobal takes a dumb timeout late, or they get a stupid penalty late, or they do something that, you know, fumbles the ball, so to speak, in a big spot, and they didn't. They made the plays down the stretch to win this game against what I think is one of the best coached teams in college football, Notre Dame. This is a really impressive win. But I think they liked CJ Carr, redshirt freshman. So we're going to see some growth from this guy. We're going to see some freshman moments, of course. But man, he had some big drives in the fourth quarter that put them right back in that ball game. And I thought he really showed some poise and some toughness late in that game. And he showed a little bit of athleticism that I don't think any of us thought he had running with the football. The only downside to that is I thought they got away from their traditional running game a little too much. It felt like they really forgot, like, hey, guys, that guy in the backfield, Jeremiah Love, yeah, he's a Heisman contender.
Mm-hmm.
Why is he only getting 10 carries? Like, to me, that was a little bit head scratching. 16 yards, 5 touches late into the third. That to me was a little shocking. I thought they kind of got away from their identity. This is a team that wants to run the ball, be tough, and have balance. And it felt like they kind of went to their quarterback running a little too much, even though I liked what I saw from him for the most part. The game was a little bit sloppy, but man, you're right about some of the highlight plays. That catch, look, I know it's week one. That might be the catch of the year in college football. We're going to look back at the end of the year and still be watching that highlight. That was unbelievable.
Miami is now number 5. They do not have a tough schedule. They only have 2 other ranked teams on their. Right now, they have us, well, rather Florida at 15, and then as of right now, SMU is ranked. I'm not sure by the time they face them that SMU will still be ranked. But starting off the season that strong and only having 2 more ranked teams, we know they'll play Florida State. That'll still be a tough. Florida State is ranked right now, sorry, but that'll be a tough game for them because it's an in-state rivalry. If they only end up with possibly, let's just say they lose to us, they lose to Florida State. A two-loss Miami team. Do you think that's strong enough to make the? As of right now, we know anything can happen, but it field of 12, and they're sitting at number 5.
I guess what you're saying is if they're a 2-loss team that doesn't win the ACC, could they get in? Yeah, I think they could. And I think this win definitely is going to help their resume because I think Notre Dame, I know Notre Dame plays Texas A&M next week, but after that, their schedule is pretty light too. So I think Notre Dame's going to win a whole bunch of games and maintain a high ranking throughout the year.
Mm-hmm.
So that win's going to look impressive as the year goes on. Yeah, and look, here's the thing. Miami just might win the ACC because what I saw was impressive. Now, this is a team that typically, like I said a minute ago with Mario Cristobal, they typically end up losing a game or two that they just have no business losing. And that's just what we've seen from him going all the way back to his days at Oregon when he's clearly got the better roster and somehow they find a way to lose against some team that has no business beating them. So if they can avoid those types of traps throughout the season and they can play like this consistently throughout the year, look, they might be a national title contender because here's the other thing, Alex. Carson Beck looked sharp. And this looked like Carson Beck from 2 years ago before we saw the pre-NFL draft slide from him last year. This looks more like the guy that we saw with Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey when he was spinning it and people were talking about could he be one of the first picks in the draft. He looked way more like that guy than the guy we saw last year. And if he continues to play like this, I think this team's dangerous. So before we shift gears here, Alex, tell me what's the panic meter for Notre Dame after this loss?
I don't think there's a panic meter at all. I don't think there's a panic. There's always, okay, let me be fair. There's always going to be some panic after you lose a game that's unexpected to lose. So let's just say theirs is at a 4, but by the next 2 to 3 weeks, I think it'll be back down to 0. Personally.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's relatively low. I was going to say a 2 or 3. I don't think there's any need to panic. I still like this team. I still like their makeup. I love their coach. I think they have enough talent to be really, really competitive. Now, I will say this before we move on. I mentioned it a second ago. That Texas A&M game, that's a big game. They lose that game, and that panic meter is going to climb quickly because they're not going to have the schedule in front of them after those games to really kind of climb back up the rankings. They're not going to have a whole lot of opportunities for showcase wins. So if you lose both those games back to back, then I think it starts to get a little nerve wracking. I think that that game became really, really big after this loss, but we'll talk about that game more next week, of course. Let's shift gears here because one game that was maybe a little off the radar, but I really enjoyed this game. South Carolina, Virginia Tech. This was Beamer ball, Alex. We were talking about this in some of the pre-show production here because this was Beamer ball all the way. And you've got Shane Beamer, of course, at South Carolina. His dad, Frank Beamer, was obviously the longtime coach at Virginia Tech. So this was kind of a fun matchup. I'm sure this was kind of an emotional matchup for him and his family. But South Carolina, look, when you look at this game, this is a good win for them. They opened the season number 13. A lot of expectations for this team that really got hot down the stretch last year and was really, really in the conversation for the playoff. They were just on the outside looking in for that playoff committee. And so I think a lot of people are looking at this team to kind of make that next step this year and maybe become one of those teams that can really contend in the SEC. I think this game was closer than the score shows. I thought Virginia Tech actually played really well. And if it wasn't for a couple big plays, that 80-yard punt return for a touchdown, Lenora Sellers, that 64-yard touchdown pass to Nick Harbor, like just a couple big key plays. And I think Virginia Tech is right in this thing. But what were your thoughts on this game, kind of key takeaways for this one?
Well, the key takeaway for me from both sides was defense. That, Virginia, we talked about the Frank Beamer ball, but that South Carolina, I was nervous for them because they lost Nick Anaramo, they lost Tonka Hemingway, they lost a cornerback as well. I thought they would be a little bit weaker, but no, this defense actually looks like they can impose their will. And South Carolina, most people feel that they probably have the toughest schedule in all of football, but especially in the SEC. They can't afford to drop any type of game whatsoever because once they get to October, they're in the gauntlet. They have in October they face LSU, Oklahoma, Alabama, Ole Miss, Texas A&M. They get a break with Coastal Carolina perhaps, and then they face Clemson. So the rest they have South Carolina State, Vanderbilt, Missouri. They need to blow those teams out because right now they're sitting at number 10. So they need to try and get as much gravitas in the next 4 to 5 weeks because once they get to October, they're hell in a cell because every week you're facing somebody. Now, of course, any one of those teams can drop off or whatever, but as of right now, it's hell in a cell going forward. Oh, it's hell in a cell once they get to October.
Yeah, this South Carolina team, you're right. They could not afford to drop this game because, like you mentioned, they have so many tough SEC opponents. And then, of course, the rivalry week game that they play every year against Clemson, who we just talked about, who obviously we know that's not going to be a layup by any means. The thing I think I'm most impressed with South Carolina is, like you mentioned, they lost a handful of really good NFL prospects off this team. And I'm watching this game going, man, that guy looks like a dude. That guy looks like a dude. There's defensive players that absolutely look like NFL draft picks. And then I mentioned briefly Nick Harbor finally looking like the guy that we all thought, one of what Bruce Feldman's freak list guys. He is. The guy is a beast athletically as far as size, speed, a rare combination of the two, but we've kind of all been waiting to see him put it together, and he looked good in this game. He looks like a big-time home run threat for them. Lenora Sellers is a guy that we've all kind of been watching and waiting to see if he kind of takes that next step this year, because obviously we know what kind of player he was last year, a little bit up and down, but a guy with a ton of talent, a dual threat quarterback, made some big runs, some big throws in this game. And you can definitely see why NFL draft analysts and a lot of NFL scouts are looking at this guy saying there is something here with Lenora Sellers. So yeah, this is a well-coached team. I think they have a sneaky amount of talent, and I think they absolutely look like a dangerous SEC spoiler, because I think they absolutely are going to knock off at least a few of those big-time teams that you mentioned on that schedule and probably send somebody home from making the playoff themselves.
Yep.
Alex, give me your thoughts before we wrap this up. Colorado, Georgia Tech, interesting year for them. Obviously, we know Shedeur Sanders moves on. You know, people can say what they want about him, but he was a high-level college quarterback. Travis Hunter was a top 5 pick. And we're kind of moving into Coach Prime 2.0, so to speak, with this Colorado team going up against a Georgia Tech team that we both think is kind of flying under the radar as a sneaky good team in the ACC. Give me your thoughts on that game.
Yeah, I've actually thought it was a good game. I thought the Colorado running game, which kind of be inept for the whole Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter experiment, kind of was not there. And I guess if you want to give credence to Marshall Faulk being there, they looked better as a better running team. The defense, a little bit tighter. They hung in there. Caden Salter looks like he can handle the reins until it's time to hand over to Juju behind him. You know, but but again, the Georgia Tech imposing their will. I think they ran for 320 yards and 3 touchdowns. Like I said, they know who they are. They know their identity. They're not gonna try and get in there and throw the ball 35 times. They're just gonna pound the ball and pound you into submission. Have fun with that, guys. I already see you making the jokes. Have fun with that.
Yeah, no, this was a fun matchup. This was kind of an under the radar matchup because, like I mentioned, we had so many big games that this one flew under the radar a little bit, which is surprising because it is Colorado, of course. But I like what I saw from that team. And I think they actually played pretty well in this game. I think Georgia Tech is a tough team, though, like we mentioned. And I think that quarterback, Haynes King for Georgia Tech, man, that guy is so tough. That run that he broke to really break that game open late was just big time. And like you said, they have, like, Georgia Tech just has an identity of toughness, smash mouth football that you have to love and appreciate no matter who you're a fan of. In Colorado, I like what Coach Prime is doing here with all these former NFL players and kind of building his roster with all these guys, this coaching roster, I should say. And it's just going to be a really kind of a fun experiment to see how it plays out. And if we see more of this going forward, because it kind of reminds me a little bit of what we've seen in the NFL with the Detroit Lions and how they've brought in so many former players to come in and coach. And that really wasn't normal, so to speak, before them. And we've kind of seen now Colorado maybe kind of taking a page out of their playbook. So that'll be really a fun team to watch and follow this year. But guys, if you guys like the show, do us a favor, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, tell us where we're right, tell us where we're wrong in the comments, and be sure to follow the podcast on your favorite audio podcast listening app, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts, because we do occasionally drop an exclusive audio-only episode. So there is some stuff over there that you might be missing if you haven't. But guys, I'm Brad Fowler once again. He's Alex Higdon. Thanks for checking us out, and we'll catch you next time.